Hello. In this session, I'm going to discuss money market. So this is a question that we are going to discuss. Can money affect production and employment? So we must analyze the money market to see how money affects production and employment. So whenever I say money market, I mean basically supply of money and demand for money, like in any other market. For example, the market for computers, we have demand for computers, supply of computers, and we determine the price, equilibrium price of computer. Same way, I'll discuss money market. That is, we discuss demand for money, why we demand money, supply of money, who supply the money, and what is the price of money. And by studying money market, I will connect this market to the real sector of the economy, that is production, output. On the slide, you can read what is the price of money, interest rate. So interest rate is the price of money. When you borrow money, so technically you are buying money against interest rate. So you have to pay back with that interest. That is actually the price of money. So let's start. So the supply of money is determined by the central bank, such as the Bank of Canada. So the central bank affects the money supply, M1, supply of money, that is currency in circulation and demand deposits, by changing commercial banks' reserves through money supply or interest rate targeting. So central bank can control this money supply, and central banks can affect money supply by using two different policies. Money supply targeting policy, directly targeting money supply, and targeting interest rate directly. In Canada, Bank of Canada targets interest rates rather than targeting money supply. So as you can see the diagram, money supply is a vertical line that is determined by the central bank. And on the horizontal axis, I have taken a quantity of money. On the vertical axis, rate of interest. That is the price of money. Now, demand for money. So we demand money primarily for the following two main reasons. For transaction purposes, that is buy goods and services. So we call it transaction demand for money because we need money to make transactions, to buy goods and services. The second reason is for investment purposes. For example, if you want to invest in government bonds, we need money to buy those bonds. So we are demanding money for investment purposes. We call it asset demand for money because bond is one of the assets among others. So that's why we are calling this as asset demand for money. So transaction demand for money is represented as MDT and asset demand for money is MDA. Remember, by asset demand for money, I mean that if you are buying more bonds, technically you are demanding less money. Why? Because you have already invested in bonds. So you don't want to keep money for investment purposes. If you're not buying bonds and you're waiting, it means you are demanding more demand for assets, more demand for money for buying assets. Let me clarify this in the next couple of slides. Remember, there are other reasons for demanding money. For example, for emergencies. So you keep certain amount of money in your bank account or in your house to meet certain emergencies. That is another reason for demanding money. But we are only dealing with these two types of money demand. That is transaction demand. So transaction demand for money depends on real GDP and price level. If prices are increasing, if we have high inflation in the country, I need more money to make transactions, to buy goods and services, because I have to pay higher prices. Second, real GDP. That is, if average income is increasing. So if I'm getting more income, I might buy more goods and services. And for that, I demand more money to buy those goods and services. So this is what is written here. If real GDP increases, people have a higher demand for money for transaction purposes only. Remember, it says it is not dependent on interest rate. So transaction demand for money doesn't depend on interest rate. So if interest rate is increasing, you are not going to reduce the demand for tomatoes, right, to buy tomatoes. So interest rate has nothing to do with directly with the transaction demand for money. So there are only two factors, real GDP and price level, that will determine transaction demand for money. Asset demand for money depends on the interest rate. People hold money and not invest if the interest rate is low. So if interest rate is very low, for example, if you are planning to buy government bonds and interest rate is very low, so you tend not to buy. It means you are keeping more money for asset demand. At higher interest rates, people will invest in interest bearing assets like government bond and do not demand money. So we are not demanding money. Why? Because we have already invested in bonds. I'll show you diagrammatically and you'll understand this point. I will add both money demand, that is for transaction purposes, and asset demand for money, that is MDA, to get the total demand for money. So I just add these two and I get this demand for. Don't get confused. This vertical line is not money supply. It's still money demand, transaction demand for money. And I told you in the previous slide that transaction demand for money is independent of interest rate. So whatever be the interest rate, the demand for money is the same. It depends, MDT depends on real GDP and price level. And you can't see these two variables in this diagram because on the horizontal axis we have quantity of money, on the vertical axis we have rate of interest. So how we are going to add? So you have MDA, that is asset demand for money. It's a downward sloping line. Notice when interest rate decreases, you are going to demand more asset demand for money. Why you are demanding more? Because you are not buying bonds because of low interest rates, or you are not investing because of low interest rate. So if I add these two curves, the resultant curve would be like this. So basically this MDA curve will shift from here to like this. So this new line is the total demand curve. How do I know it's the total demand curve? Because I shifted this MDA curve by this amount, from here to by this amount. Right? Let me show you here. So see, this is what I've done. So notice total demand for money, that is MD, will never start from the zero. That is from here, somewhere here. Let me mark here. It will not start from here. No, because total demand for money, you always have some transaction demand for money that is independent of interest. Even if interest rate is very high, you still have transaction demand for money. So demand for money will never be zero, actually. Total demand for money. Asset demand for money can be zero. If you are here at this point, here transaction asset demand for money is zero. Why? Because interest rate is so high that you are not demanding money for investment. You have already invested. That is possible. But total demand will never be equal to zero. Why? Because you always need some money to make transactions. Okay, so that is the total demand for money, that is MD, which is equal to MDT plus MDA. Now, once we have total demand for money and total supply of money, We can easily find equilibrium price of money, that is equilibrium interest rate. So at the equilibrium interest rate, you can see at R1, there's no surplus or shortage of money in the money market. So whatever is being supplied by the central bank is demanded by consumers, right? Either for transaction purposes or for asset demand for money. Okay. Now, suppose if equilibrium price, that is interest rate, is not at equilibrium, then what would happen? So suppose I know that at R1 interest rate, there's no surplus, no shortage of money. That is for sure, because demand equals supply. At R3, that is above the equilibrium interest rate, notice there's a surplus. Surplus means we have more money in the economy, but people are demanding less money. They don't need more money. Okay. And at R2 interest rate, there's a shortage. Why shortage? Because you can see in the diagram that people are demanding this much, whereas total supply of money is only this much. Let me mark it so that you know what I'm talking about. So this is the total demand, and this is the total supply. So we have shortage here. This is the shortage. Okay. Now in the same slide, I wrote surplus of money, people buy bonds. Shortage of money, people sell bonds. So this is the assumption. Otherwise, the analysis will be more complicated. So what I'm assuming, let's say if there's a surplus, what is the meaning of surplus? Surplus means that you have more money than you want for transaction and for asset, right? So let me go back here and show you this, because I'm talking about only two demand, transaction demand, asset demand for money, right? So if there's a surplus in the money market, it means that the supply of money is more than the demand for money. By demand for money, I mean both transaction and asset demand for money. What would happen? So if there's more, you have more money than you require, then you can use that money to buy more bonds, for example. So that's why I wrote here, whenever you have surplus of money, people buy bonds because they have extra money. And whenever there's a shortage of money, suppose if you need more money, let's say to make a transaction, to buy goods and services, where does that money come from? You have to sell your bonds that you have already bought and get the cash with you, and so that you can make transactions. So whenever there's a shortage of money, people sell bonds. Now, before going to discuss the adjustment process, that suppose if rate of interest in the money market is R3 instead of R1, then how this rate will, will be adjusted and go back again to R1. What is the process? So we'll discuss this process, but before going to discuss this process, let me discuss the important relationship between interest rate and price of bond. So before discussing how the money market adjusts, that is, if you have surplus, then the surplus will be eliminated. Let me explain the relationship between the price of bond and its rate of return, RR. That is interest rate technically, using a simple example. So let's take this example. And it is simple example. Suppose the face value of a bond is 500. So $500 is printed on the bond. It's already printed on the bond, right? So suppose if this is a bond, then 500 is printed here. This is what we call face value. The coupon rate is 4%. Coupon rate is 4% means that when you, after the maturity date, and suppose this bond has a 1 year maturity. So for example, if you buy this bond for $5,000, suppose now, and you redeem after 1 year. So when you redeem after 1 year, you will get from the government $5,000, that is the face value, and 4% of this $5,000, that is $200, right? But you know what happens? I gave the example when you actually bond from the bond issuer, that is government. But we have a secondary bond market as well. Suppose if I buy this bond for $5,000 today, and I really, after 1 week, I really need money. What I'm going to do? I will take this bond to the secondary bond market and sell my bond at a price maybe lower than the face value or higher than the face value. It all depends on the market conditions. If everyone is selling bonds, then the price of bond will decrease. That is price lower than the face value. If we all want to buy bonds because we have more money, then the price of bond will increase. So let's take both cases. So suppose if the bond price in the secondary market is 4,700, that is, it simply suggests that people are selling bonds. That is why the price is lower than the face value, less than 5,000. What would happen? What is your interest? What is your rate of return on this investment? You haven't invested $5,000. You invested just $4,700. Not remember this, right? So this is how we calculate. So if I buy this bond with a face value of $5,000, but I paid only $4,700, at the end of the year, when I redeem this bond from the government, if it's a government bond, then I will receive $5,000, and I also receive 4% of $5,000, that is $200. So $200 is my earning. And since I paid only $47,000 to this bond, so I'm also making $300 extra. So this is what I've written here. So $200, this $200 is the coupon rate, 4% of $5,000, not 4% of not 4,700, 4% of the face value. That is why this is called coupon rate. And then I get extra $300 because when I redeem, I get $5,000 instead of 4,700. So I make $500 on the investment of 4,700 only. So my return is 10.64%, not 4%, 10.64%. Now let's see if the price is greater than 5,000, what would happen? Okay, so suppose if the price is 5,100, that is, I bought this $5,000 face value bond for 5,100. What would happen? So my return would be, I will get definitely $200, that is coupon rate, 4% of 5,000 at the end of the year after the maturity date. But I'm losing $100 because I spent 5,100 and I get only $5,000 when I redeem. So I lose $100. So 200 minus 100, 100. I make only $100 when I invested not 5,000, 5,100. So my return is only 1.96%. Notice when price of bond increases from 4,700 to 5,100, notice what is happening. The return on the investment, that is this and this, the return is decreasing. So remember, the relationship between price of a bond and the rate of return is negative, is inversely, they are inversely related, is negative or inverse. So remember, whenever price of bond will increase, rate of return or rate of interest will decrease. Remember this relationship, negative relationship. Now it's easy. Let's take the example of, start with shortage. So if there's a shortage in the money market, and by shortage, I mean the interest rate is somewhere below the equilibrium interest rate that is here. This is the interest rate. So we have shortage. What would happen if we have shortage? So I'll discuss this adjustment process here in this slide. So by shortage, I mean the demand for money is greater than supply of money. People are demanding more money. They need more cash. How? People sell their bonds. Simple. When they sell their bonds, it means there's a surplus in the bond market. So bond prices in the secondary bond market will decrease because everyone is selling bonds. So when price will decrease, I told you the rate of return on bonds will increase in the previous slide. When rate of interest increases, the asset demand for money will decrease. Why? Because if interest rate increases, people are going to buy more bonds. Therefore, they are going to demand less money. So MDA will decrease and solve the problem of shortage. How? Let's see this diagram. This is what is happening. So when you have shortage in the money market, people will sell their bonds. Price of bond will decrease. Rate of interest will increase. When rate of interest will increase in this direction, okay, in this direction, then asset demand for money will decrease because people are now investing in bonds, and eventually you reach to the equilibrium point. For surplus, exactly the opposite case. For surplus, money demand is less than money supply. People buy their bonds. Why? Because they have more money. Bond prices in the secondary bond market will increase because everyone is demanding money or demanding bonds, trying to buy bonds. The rate of return on bonds will decrease because they are inversely related. When rate of interest decreases, asset demand for money will increase because there's a downward sloping demand curve line, and solve the problem of surplus like this. So if this is the case, rate of interest will decrease, and when rate of interest decreases, notice the asset demand for money will also decrease, and you will reach to this equilibrium again. So this is the adjustment profit. So at the equilibrium interest rate R1, there's no surplus or shortage of money. At R3, there's a surplus. So whenever we have surplus of money, people buy bonds because we have more money to buy. Increasing price of bond, by PB I mean price of bond, which will decrease rate of interest and increase money demand. And this surplus is eliminated. So that's all as far as money market is concerned. Thank you.